Where are your manners? Did they not raise you well? You can't even say Happy New Year, Great Britain. Happy New Year, UK. He just went straight for, we're delivering for the British people. You can't bring your family members here if you're a foreign uni student. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I do not know when you're listening to this podcast, but welcome back to It's That Deep, the podcast, yet another episode. Woo, woo. Cheers, screams, shouts, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much for joining me for not only another episode, but the first episode of 2024. So Happy New Year's are in order. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for coming back. If you are not coming back and this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. This is a space, I hope, where we can just weekly, debrief and unpack some of the week's biggest news stories, some of the biggest happenings in culture, in politics, and just have a good chinwag about them. I have big goals for this podcast this year. My hope is honestly that you're listening to this, I hope that I'm background noise. I know that sounds really weird, but I hope that I'm background noise, and I hope that you just allow me, in the words of Destiny's Child, to cater to you and to bring you the news right to your doorstep, because I know not everyone has time to listen to the news like that. So let me cater to you and let me be the person that catches you up on everything that's happening in the world. So that's my goal, that's my hope for this podcast for this year. Someone actually said that I should explain why I've called it It's That Deep, and I probably will at a later stage. But thank you so much for joining us for another episode. We're going to get right into it because I don't know about you guys, but there's something about the first 7 days of every year that very strange things are, word to terms, crazy things are happening. There's always really, really weird things happening in the first week of every new year. And this year was no exception. So there's a lot that's happened, and we're just going to get right into it, and we're going to unpack some of the stories, some of the tea. So like I said, a lot has happened. I mean, I'm going to just riff it off the tongue and then get to my honourable picks, but what happened this year? Okay, Japan, there's already been I was about to say tsunami, that is crazy. Tsunami in Japan. There was a stabbing in Japan. There's been stabbings in London, gunshots in Liverpool. There has been a mass shooting in America, and as I'm recording this is the 5th of January, and that's not even everything that's happened. I'm definitely missing stuff. But as you can see, the year has gotten off to a very interesting start. People have been talking about Stormzy. People have been talking about Cat William. There's just a lot. So I struggled with my honourable picks for this week. But it was always going to be the Epstein list. So let's talk about the Epstein list. Quick rewind. History lesson for those who are unaware. So Jeffrey Epstein is now dead. He unalived himself, and he was a sexual offender basically, and sex trafficker of women but also children. And his partner in crime, the Bonnie to his Clyde, Ghislaine Maxwell, was arrested and has been imprisoned for basically supporting his tomfoolery and his criminality. And so during the trial against her, obviously lots of depositions, lots of court documents were all written out, and a judge last year, basically ordered that all of these court documents would be unsealed in the new year. So January 1st, it was supposed to be a little New Year's Day treat, do you know what I mean? Drop the tea, drop the list of Jeffrey Epstein's colleagues. Didn't drop on New Year's Day, it dropped on January the 4th. And people have been salivating and waiting in the shadows for this list. They have really, myself included, let me not separate myself. People have been really intrigued to see who is on this list, what is happening, what's the tea, basically. And now that I've had time to, I'm going to be honest, not reading 900 pages worth of just court documents not doing it. But I read at least like a third of the documents. I did that for you guys. Do you know what I mean? And now that I've had time to sit and just reflect, I have some thoughts on not even really the list per se. So obviously there's names on the list that we were all expecting. Prince Andrew, what's his name? Bill Clinton. Those were the two names that were mentioned a lot. Michael Jackson was on the list, Naomi Campbell, Stephen Hawking, you know, big celebrity and public figures. But now that I've had time to sort of step back and reflect, my thoughts are not really about the list so much. It's more so about our response to criminality as a society. So what do I mean by that? Like I said, I've had time to step aside and just like, Feyisara, just like think about what's happening. And in my like meditations and in my thinking, I really, and I had to even check myself, because I find it really weird how we all responded to the list. Like, I felt like the response, particularly on social media and even in like broadcast news outlets, it was more of like a thing of like sensationalism. And it was like, who can we find out who's on the list? Like, what's the tea? Like, it just really got me thinking about how desensitized we have become to criminality. Like, these are, like I said, he did horrible things. And so the fact that the son of one of the world's longest reigning monarchs is even associated with him and accused of criminality in those documents, because he is. The fact that the leader of the free world at a point in time is also associated with him. Like, it's not shits and gigs, you know what I mean? It's not fun and games. Like, I'm struggling to even get my thoughts out, because I just find it weird how we all reacted to this list. Like, and the thing is, these people have come out and they've put statements out and they've said things like, I'm not associated with him, never been, you know, I cut ties with him in the case of Bill Clinton. And it's like, we all just accept it and just jog on to the next person. And I think, I don't know whether it's social media, I don't know what it is, and I don't know whether it's like our overconsumption of criminal content, like true crime documentaries, true crime podcasts. But I was just really noticing, and like I said, I'm not exempt because I had to check myself, but I'm really noticing a trend where there's such sensationalism around crime and what it is, and there's almost little to no regard for victims. Like, people are more interested on who's on this list, who are we dragging, who are we shocked by, than the fact that these are children in a lot of cases, and women, vulnerable women who have been hurt and abused and put at risk, never mind who it was by. Do you know what I mean? Let's put that to the side for one moment. I think there is really something that's happening where we consume so much content about crime and criminal behavior that we don't give it the same gravity that it's worth. Even the way everything was revealed, it was very much giving like TV drama. The end of the season was left on a cliffhanger, and now we're all waiting for the next season. Like, it was almost treated to a degree like fiction. And I don't know, I mean, I know for me personally, I'm making an effort in 2024 to cut down my consumption of information. Like, I saw a tweet the other day that says we are not designed to consume so much information all the time. And I think there is a link somehow between our overconsumption of content, and particularly in the area of crime. Like, there's a story every day about someone being stabbed, every day about someone being attacked. There has to be a link between that and how desensitized we are to criminal activity. And I really, when I stepped back and assessed the severity of the situation, that's really my biggest takeaway from this whole Epstein list drama. It's not who's on the list, as much as that does intrigue me. It's more so like, why am I so desensitized to the fact that there were people hurt in the grand scheme of this thing? Like, why is my attention more on Naomi Campbell and Stephen Hawking and not the victims of their crimes? So just food for thought. Like, I think it's something worth assessing as we carry on into the year. Like, we are not designed to be desensitized to crime. We're designed to flinch and like grimace at the sound of some of the crimes Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell committed, but I don't know what it is that has made us so like blasé about it. But those are my thoughts about the Epstein list. I know you probably thought I was going to talk about Naomi Campbell and like no. When I really reflect, that's not what's important. Okay, so my second honourable pick for this week, and yeah, now that I'm even looking at it, I do hope to bring some positives, like some good news or something light. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's been quite heavy, but I felt a personal responsibility to speak on this, and also largely for the fact that I've actually not seen it reported anywhere for the most part. So I was like, yeah, let's speak on it. And so my second honourable pick is the Christian massacres that have been taking place in Nigeria and are still taking place as we speak. So over the Christmas season in the state of Plateau in Nigeria, there have been, so the death toll is rising. It's almost 200, but it's somewhere between 150 and 200 massacres of Christians in that area. Like I said, over the Christmas season. And even when I started doing my reading on this, my mind just took me back to so many other occasions where this has been the case. Like, this was not the first Christmas where there have been attacks on Christians, on Catholics. There's been, particularly on Christmas Day, there's always like a spike in religious crime, if I can call it that. So 2023, that's exactly what happened. They are calling this both an ethno-religious conflict, because the conflict, yes, although it's between Muslims and Christians, it's also, so the state of Plateau is basically, it sits in the middle belt, what they call the middle belt of Nigeria, which is basically the intersection of many religious groups but also many tribal groups. So the big three, so obviously the Yoruba, the Igbos and the Hausas, but also many of the smaller tribes, and then of course the religious groups from Christians to Muslims, and that's like extreme jihadists to your moderate everyday Muslim to even like traditionalists. So there has been a lot of conflict, and it stems from both religious like backgrounds and then also ethnic backgrounds. Again, not necessarily an analysis of the situation itself. My main and my instant thought when I was reading about this, because the only article I saw was in CNN, and it's again gave the history of how this has been ongoing conflicts for decades. My first initial thought was like, where is this being reported? And it took my mind to a question I ask myself a lot, which is, what do we consider to be news? I would think the massacre of Christians on Christmas Day would be newsworthy, but the world for the most part is silent. The world for the most part is still and oblivious to the fact that this is even happening. Like I said, so far in my research, I've seen CNN and I read a Reuters article, but I have not really seen any major news outlets reporting on this or speaking on it. And like I said, I really had to dig to find credible sources. Maybe I am biased because I'm religious and I'm also a Nigerian, so I relate on those two levels to this story. But I just, like, my mind just was like, well, why is nobody reporting this? Why is this not newsworthy to anybody? And I can't also help but think that maybe the reason this conflict has gone on for decades is because nobody's reporting on it. Nobody's offering resources to it. Nobody's considering it worth even covering. And so those are my thoughts on that. I really would urge, and actually with everything that I speak on, and you know, we go back and forth on this podcast, like, the encouragement is to just read and just like get an article, get resources, actually understand what's happening beyond what I talk about on this podcast. So this conflict is one I'm really going to go and like investigate and try and understand, because I was just not even, as a Nigerian, aware of it. And I'm not going to obviously get any sources or any information from anywhere else because nobody's covering it. So I think there's a real like need for agency and a need to investigate for ourselves and form opinions for ourselves. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Like I said, next week my honorable picks will be light, I promise, but I felt that this needed to at least be mentioned. All right, we're going to jump into our first main story of the year. And like I said, it's a new year, but it's also election year for us over here in the UK and also for the Americans, but I don't really care about the Americans today. I want to talk about these United Kingdoms because we at some point this year are going to elect our prime minister. I say that we don't really elect our prime minister, that's not how it works, but we're going to pick our representatives at some point in this year. And something about election years, just everyone starts moving fishy. Do you know what I mean? Like everyone just starts moving a bit mad, and there's just a lot to look out for in terms of how people grab for power. And so, of course, the main contenders, as with most years, when it comes to general elections, is between Labour and the current ruling party, the Conservative Party. And so on New Year's Day, Rishi Sunak he quote tweeted a tweet from the Home Office, which basically was celebrating new legislation that would basically stop the family members of foreign university students from being able to move to the UK. So the Home Office tweeted that, and then Rishi Sunak quote tweeted it. I'm gonna like read the tweet verbatim so I don't like misrepresent what he said. He basically said, from today, the majority of foreign university students cannot bring family members to the UK. In 2024, we're already delivering for the British people. I just like, my first comment on this is like, where's your manners? Where's your manners? No Happy New Year. That was his first tweet of the year, guys. And we're gonna unpack why this is so significant in an election year, but where are your manners? Did they not raise you well? You can't even say Happy New Year, Great Britain. Happy New Year, UK. He just went straight for, we're delivering for the British people. You can't bring your family members here if you're a foreign uni student. Now, I'm actually not going to analyse the policy in and of itself because you can probably find that analysis somewhere else. But what I'm interested in is why this was such a tactical move on the Conservative Party's behalf. And I think it speaks a lot to really what they're going to continue to do throughout the rest of this year in the hopes that they win another election. So I feel like it's a widely known fact that when, and this is going to sound really like off course, it's going to sound very irrelevant, but stick with me. So I feel like it's a widely known fact that when somebody is making a speech or they have a statement they want to share, something along those lines, that the first thing they say and then the last thing that they say are the two most important points. So like you could ignore everything in the middle, but what the first thing that person said and the last thing that person said is really what they want you to take away. Now, why is that significant? Because we are in an election year, and instantly when I saw Rishi Sunak's tweet, his very classless tweet that he couldn't even say Happy New Year, I found it really interesting that on the 1st of January of an election year, he would choose to tweet and celebrate policy about immigration. And I think if we go by that logic of like the first and the last thing that somebody says is really what they want you to stick with, by that logic, I'm going to make the prediction that immigration is really going to be the issue that the Conservative Party are going to peddle and they're going to beat us over the head with throughout the course of this year for the next 10 or 11 months or however long we have till the election. They are going to push like it's going to be immigration. And I think they're going to do that because they want that to be the salient and the most, like the foremost topic in the minds of voters when we go to the polls in whenever we do. Immigration is such a techie topic. Like it has become so personal, and so sentimental, and people have real emotional connections to this issue. Bear in mind, like, it would make sense for the foreign minister to make that announcement, or, you know, just leave it at the Home Office, but the Prime Minister, the leader of that party, decided to quote tweet it. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because in a world where we could be talking about the cost of living crisis, we could be talking about climate change, environmentalism, we could be talking about so many other issues that matter to the general public, they chose to start the year off with immigration. And I think that is because they want that to be the driving factor that we take to the polls with us. So my prediction for 2024 is that, like, watch very, very carefully and see how, particularly Rishi Sunak, because other ministers will talk about other issues, but it's really what the leader of the party talks about that is really what represents the party's goals as a whole. So pay attention to what he's saying, pay attention to what he makes speeches about, pay attention to what, even when they have the debates, like, what is the main topic of discussion, because that is going to be what they want us to focus on, and that is going to be what they want us to vote based on. Like I said, it's important that we take note of how these people move, because how someone moves in an election year is really reveals how much they want power. And even yesterday, so I think it was the 4th, he announced, like, the election is not going to happen by May. It's going to happen in the latter part of the year. So he's giving himself enough time not only to push the rhetoric of immigration, but actually be able to deliver on some of the policies, so that when we do go to the polls, he has a track record. So I think it's going to be a really interesting year in terms of how everything plays out before the election. The opposition is not positioning anything. In fact, anyways, Tory Light been saying that. But it will be really interesting to just see what the prominent issues are and what they try to shape this year to be. And so yeah, I'm really interested to see how everything plays out. But there we go, there we have it. That was my main story. But yeah, join me on next week's episode. We'll probably talk more about the election and everything that's coming up. Maybe something else will crop up next week and we'll talk about something completely different. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you pro Rishi Sunak? Are you pro Keir Starmer? What are your thoughts on the Nigerian massacre, because we're going to call it that, and the Epstein list as well? Like, what were your reactions to some of the names on the list? I would love to know. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I got through it because my throat was actually killing me, but we made it. We did it, Joe. We made it. But thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next week for a whole new round of stories, a whole new round of conversations. Like, comment, share, do all of the things that podcasters are supposed to tell you to do at the end of the podcast. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Peace.